Well, good evening officially and welcome to our research and technology class TEC 5143, section number 2. And today we have two treats, Dr. Jim Painter and Claudia. And they are researchers. Let me introduce Dr. Painter first. Some of you know him already. He is first and foremost my friend. More than that also, or in addition to that, he is a researcher, he is a thinker, he is a writer, he is a speaker, national speaker, he is a dietitian. He was former chair of the School of Family and Consumer Sciences in this building. And he keeps active. I mean, it's amazing how he does lots of things in his time. After retirement, it's no retirement at all, I guess, no. So without much ado, will you please join with me in this cold weather to give him a warm welcome.
Thanks. Thanks. We were just talking about the origin of life up here and came up with the ideas. My personal feeling is we don't know. And one of the things I want to talk about today is failed theories of heart disease. It's a sad, sad thing to me when you have science getting messed up with just thought. So where do we end up? When you have a heart attack and you go to a hospital, they put you on 4 things. What does a doctor tell you to do if you're at risk of heart disease? They say to what? Aspirin? What else they say to do dietary-wise? Cut out fat. What else? You're the only one that knows. Cut out fat. Exercise is good. Eat chocolate. Chocolate's one of the good things in life. We eat chocolate. We love chocolate. Actually, I have a talk after this one on 10 foods to reduce heart disease, and chocolate is number 10. It doesn't one. Sugar's 1, 2. The main 4 things people say is eat less fat, eat less saturated fat, eat less cholesterol, and eat less sodium. And what I want to tell you today is that those 4 things are almost not true completely. And how did we get there believing all these things that aren't true? So Claudia is going to give us this first one here. This is what happened in the beginning. What is LDL? Is LDL good or bad cholesterol? It's bad. Bad. LDL is bad cholesterol. And so for about 2 decades, we kept looking at this, saying saturated fat makes bad cholesterol go up, and then trans fat makes it go up even worse. Look how bad saturated fat is. But then we started looking at HDL. That's good cholesterol. Well, saturated fat makes good cholesterol go up better than everything else. And so really the key is the balance between the two. So now we look at the balance, and what do we find? If you look at the balance of HDL and LDL, saturated fat does almost nothing. It's not effective. And then still, you've got poly and monounsaturated fats that lower it, and trans fat makes it go up. But we looked at a piece of the evidence for 4 decades, and we came to the wrong conclusion. And just, I don't know how many thousands of people died because they went home, they ate less fat, ate less saturated fat, ate less cholesterol and sodium, and then died, miserable. If you're going to die, you ought to die with a burger in your mouth, enjoying life. And so, next one. Dietary fat intake and coronary heart disease in women. This is a 20-year study looking at this nurses' health study from the people at Harvard. And what they found was, from the lowest intake to the highest intake of fat, saturated fat doesn't do anything. Poly and monounsaturated fat reduces risk, and trans fat makes it go up. The thing is, that's not new data. It's been around forever. It's just that nobody was looking at it. We looked at a small piece of the data, and it led us in the wrong direction. We were talking about intuition and using intuitive reasoning to start with an idea and then look at the final result. The initial idea was coronary artery disease, there's fat in there. There's cholesterol in there. It must be fat and cholesterol that causes it. But the thing is, it doesn't. And we found many other things that do. Next one. So this is dietary saturated fat. Certain dietary saturated fats do tend to make blood cholesterol go up. You can skip this. This is a meta-analysis we're going to look at. So when you look at all the studies in a meta-analysis on saturated fat, the variation is huge, and the risk is almost nothing for saturated fat. And then down here, saturated fat is actually protective against stroke. So saturated fat's not the villain we thought it was. Here is a study on coconuts. Are coconuts good or bad for you? Good. That's because you come from India, right? Ah, that's right, because you're smarter over there. But in this country, we've been cutting out coconut oil for 3 decades. And lo and behold, this is a study from India, and it's from, what is it? Kerala, South India. All right. This is one of the first ones in 1997, and they looked at people that had heart disease compared to those who did not have heart disease. And what they found is that the patients with heart disease, on average, ate 5,024 coconuts in a lifetime. Those people that didn't have heart disease ate 5,241. They had an extra 200 coconuts, and their risk of heart disease went down. And so it was one of the first things to us in the States where we found out maybe we're wrong about this whole coconut thing being bad. And now, really, coconut's a health food. It's actually very beneficial, and we've been cutting it out of the diet en masse for 30 years. This is a little study that she did.
Right, so we did a little study, and we were looking at the perceptions of heart disease, and we looked at consumers, students, and faculty to see if there were any differences in how they believed, if they believed total fat or cholesterol or saturated fat led to heart disease. And this one just looks at total fat, and it shows that for consumers, over 80% of them thought that dietary fat contributed to heart disease, and then students over 95%, and then faculty over 90%. So all of them strongly believe that total fat leads to heart disease.
So what's interesting is we taught the things that were here so wrong for so long, everybody believes it. And now we know it's not true. The Mediterranean diet, is it high in fat or low in fat? It's pretty high in fat. Yeah, and is it healthy for you, the Mediterranean diet? Yeah. So a lot of fat in the diet, if it's the right fat, is a very good diet. And so here we have students and faculty believing that 95% of them believing that fat is bad. And it's not true. So we have a lot to do to straighten that out. And then this is what Claudia's been working on for the last 2.5 months, cholesterol.
Right, so then this just shows that over the years, ever since 1980, they've been endorsing that you consume less cholesterol. So the dietary guidelines say that you should have less than 300 milligrams of cholesterol a day. And keep in mind that eggs have around 280 milligrams each, so that would mean that you would only have 1 egg a day.
So I sent Claudia out. Find where this 300 milligrams, where's the data to show me that 300 milligrams is bad? And she worked day after week after month to find out where's the data to show that this is bad, and she could find none.
And this right here is just a nutrition label where it tells you that you should have less than 300, and it is endorsed by the FDA. So on all the food items that you get, it's going to tell you that you should be having less than 300. So where did this 300 come from? Where did the recommendations come from? They're based on animal studies, studies that did not take into account other risk factors such as smoking or being overweight, and then studies that provided excessive amounts of cholesterol, so amounts that we normally wouldn't have in the typical diet. So then this goes back to the animal studies. So in 1912, they discovered that feeding rabbits excessive amount of cholesterol led to atherosclerosis, which is the hardening of the arteries. However, they did not take into account that rabbits are herbivores and they metabolize cholesterol differently than we do. So then in 2000, the AHA, which is the American Heart Association, said that there was no basis for selecting the 300 milligrams of cholesterol.
So I wanted to find out where this came from. I called John Erdman at the U of I. He's the #1 nutritionist in the country and in the world. And he is on the dietary reference intakes set out by the Institute of Medicine. He is the chair of the standing committee of that group for 10 years. And so I went to John. We called him up and said, John, where did this 300 milligrams come from? Everybody believes it. And he said, we got it from the American Heart Association. And we called the American Heart Association, and we said, where did this come from? And they said, well, we're revising our standards. I said, I get it, you're revising them, but where did it come from? He said, sir, we're revising our standards. I said, I get that, you're revising your standards, but where did this one come from? And she said, sir, we're revising our standards. Okay, so nobody knows where it came from. And it was the law of the land and the world for decades. And again, it was based on intuition, intuitive thought. We think it should be this way because it's in here. But we found out year after year after year, the amount of cholesterol you eat in here doesn't affect the amount of cholesterol in here.
So where the bases come from also dates back to Keyes, who was a researcher, and he gathered data from 22 studies, but only used 7 to say that cholesterol led to heart disease. But when you looked at the other countries that he didn't look at, it actually shows that there was an inverse relationship. So this man, Malcolm Kendrick, took the other countries that Keyes didn't use in his study, and he found out that the more fat and cholesterol that you ate, your risk for heart disease actually decreased.
So why do we end up with bad results? Is because we cherry pick data. And so in this case, he had 22 countries. We found 7 of them that supported his theory that if you increase fat and cholesterol, you increase heart disease. So he published this huge study on the 7-country study, but he had 22. And when you look at all 22, it's exactly backwards. As fat and cholesterol go up, risk for heart disease goes down. And that was the main study that sent off 30 years worth of the fat theory of heart disease that wasn't just in this country, but it went worldwide. All because of someone cherry-picking data.
And then this right here just shows you that we are one of the only countries left that actually says that we should limit our cholesterol intake. And then this, like I said before, eggs have around 280 calories, so they're considered, a good source of cholesterol. And it shows you that the more cholesterol you eat, the lower your risk for, what is it?
The lower your risk for heart disease.
Heart disease, yes.
And so I have to be honest with who I am. I'm a professor, but I am the director of nutrition for the California Raisin Marketing Board, responsible for raisin nutrition countrywide. And I work with Paramount Farms. And so I'm a researcher with Paramount Farms Pistachio Health. And I work for a major egg company as their spokesperson. Now, why do I work for an egg company? And do I say this stuff about eggs because I work for their company? No. They heard me say this, and they said, can we hire you? And just because someone asked me, I don't. I had the corn refiners come to me and say, we want to hire you. You believe that high fructose corn syrup is the same as sucrose. I said, it is. We want to hire you to say that. And I said, you got to be kidding me. I don't want to spend my life talking about one sugar being as good as another sugar. They're both bad. And so this one I took up when they said, can you be a spokesperson? I did, because here's data, again, that if you eat 1 egg, less than 1 egg a week, they set your risk at 1. And then if you eat 1 egg a week, your risk goes up 9%. You eat 2 to 4 eggs a week, your risk goes up 16%. If you eat 5 to 6 eggs a week, your risk drops by 3% for men. So really, the more eggs, the better. And for women, at 1, it's set at less than 1 egg a week. And then if they eat more than 1 egg a week, their risk for heart disease drops by 25% if you eat more than 1 egg a week. And then if you eat 2 to 4 eggs a week, your risk drops still by 5%. And if you eat 5 to 6, it drops by still 3%. So eating more eggs is protective for women at all levels of egg consumption.
Then this right here is pretty similar too. So as he told you earlier, LDL is the bad cholesterol and HDL is considered the good cholesterol. And when people consumed eggs, their HDL, as we can see in all children, women, and men, their HDL went up in all of them. Some of them, like men and women, experienced no change in LDL, which is the bad one. And then the ratio, which is the important one, there was really no change.
This is my favorite one, so I'll talk about it. So if you have high cholesterol, it's over 100, that's bad. So 130 is kind of dangerous. If you eat 1 egg a week, it goes from 130 to 134. Your risk goes up 1.2%. You're in bad shape now. Your cholesterol is 150. You eat an egg, it goes to 154. it goes up by 0.7%. And if your cholesterol is really high at 170 and you eat an egg, it goes to 174. It's an increase in LDL of 0.3%. 0.3%. So people say, does it make a difference? Yeah, it makes about this much difference. There's 20 things that are more effective at reducing cholesterol levels than the amount of cholesterol that you eat.
And this is a study that looked at Americans' concerns about dietary cholesterol. And in 1997, 20% of the people that were surveyed were concerned, and in 2004, only 14 were concerned. When I did my study, though, on consumers and students and faculty around here, I found that 85% to almost 95% of them still thought that dietary cholesterol led to heart disease.
Now, so what I want to say to you, yes, what's your question?
What they thought were, like on a scale of 1 to 7, how much did they think dietary cholesterol or total fat, as we saw earlier, led to heart disease? On a scale of 1 to 7, how much did they think dietary cholesterol and total fat led to heart disease or contributed to heart disease? And yes, and then there was one additional question where we asked them what factors, what dietary factors would prevent heart disease. And then they would say things like eliminating meat or reducing total fat, things like that. Yeah, it was really interesting.
That's right, and we were only interested in the dietary part. Well, there's lots of things that affect it, but we wanted to know what they thought about the dietary part. And so my point to you tonight is this, and we're going to take this talk in its full version around the country. I have it set to go to California Dietetic, Florida Dietetic, South Carolina Dietetic, Texas Dietetic, and some other ones, and Nebraska, a few other ones. And we're going to give this to dietitians because it just really bothers me that when someone has a heart attack, they tell them cut out fat. I just showed you that doesn't work. Cut out saturated fat. It doesn't work very well either. Cut out cholesterol. It does almost nothing. And then cutting out sodium does do something for about 10% of the population. For the other 90%, it doesn't do anything. And so if you focus on those 4 things, you're sunk. And so we have 10 things that reduce heart disease that work really well. You know, phytosterols are one. You get those in nuts and things like that. And soluble fiber is another one. Eating cholesterol should make your cholesterol go up. What does fiber have to do with making your cholesterol go up? How can fiber affect cholesterol? You know, it's counterintuitive. You would think cholesterol does, but it doesn't, because when you eat cholesterol, it makes LDL and HDL change about the same. But when you eat fiber, and you eat soluble fiber, it makes LDL drop like a rock. Why? When you eat fiber, your body produces bile salts to digest fat. And then those get reabsorbed again, and they get used again. But if you have the soluble fiber in there, it traps those bile salts and pulls them out of the system. So within 2 hours, your body says, I need more bile salts. What's the substrate our body uses to make bile salts? Cholesterol. So within 2 hours, your liver upregulates LDL receptors. It grabs more LDL out of the system to make more bile salts. The more fiber you eat, the more bile salts are absorbed or taken out of the system, the more cholesterol. And so it's a vicious cycle of helping you out to reduce your blood cholesterol. I had a friend, he's my height, he weighs twice as much as I do. And he was with the Raisin Board. We used to travel together all the time. His cholesterol was 260. And he started taking Metamucil every morning. It's a soluble fiber. You stir it up, turns it into a gel. And he drank it every morning for 3 months. He went back to his doctor. His cholesterol dropped from 260 down to 140. That was huge. His doctor also said, wow, did you change your diet? He said, do I look like I've changed my diet? And he goes, what did you do? He said, I have Metamucil every morning. He goes, that's the biggest drop I've ever seen. What are you doing different? And he says, I take Metamucil every morning. And the doctor says, well, I don't know what you're doing, but keep it up. I take Metamucil every morning. And that wouldn't even hit the doctor's consciousness because it's not anything he was thinking about. And so it's hard sometimes to things that are counterintuitive. But I can tell you how we got into this trouble in the first place is not looking at the data and going by what we have. And we had good data. It's just that we were looking at pieces of the data, just LDL and not the combination of the two. or we're looking at pieces of information on 7 countries and not all 22 and trying to prove it. So it's very dangerous when we have an intuition we think is true before we have data, and then we start looking at the data. It takes a long time to start chiseling away what we think is true, even though the data is showing us that it is. So that's our information on heart disease. And so does the pharmaceutical company have any say? No, except they have a whole lot of sway, because what their goal is to give you a pill that lowers cholesterol. So all their studies are focused on lowering cholesterol and what their pill does to lower cholesterol. And so
we found a study where they people were taking a cholesterol lowering drug. Sorry, so they were taking a cholesterol lowering drug, and it did lower their cholesterol, but they still had a plaque buildup, which shows that they were still getting atherosclerosis and they were still at risk of getting a heart attack.
Right. So it does. I mean, there's lots of influences. Money's an influence. I'm telling you, it's so hard as a scientist. I've spent my life on this, and I know this is true, and when the data starts showing me it's not, do you know how hard it is to go with the data and now what your whole life's goal has been? We used to study soy up at the University of Illinois, and so there was this real pressure to show that soy reduced heart disease risk. And the pressure on these scientists to make the data turn out the way they wanted and to push it that direction is huge. That's why we have double-blind, placebo-controlled studies, so that you don't know who's in what. So you can't push the data. But even with double-blind studies, we could have, here's the milk protein, here's the soy protein, it's yellow. Here's the mixture, it's half yellow, half white. That's group number 2. You know, you can say it's a double-blind study, but I can look at it and tell who's on what, because I know what they look like. So it's difficult to come up with a double-blind study. I say it is, and one day I came in and I looked at it, and this is half white, half yellow, half white, half yellow, half white, half yellow. I went to my students and said, what is going on here? They said, sorry, doc, we can't tell you. Yeah, you better tell me. What did you do? How did you make this one, and this one? And it turned out for 3 weeks we had been giving everybody the exact same diet. That was a sad day. We had spent tens of thousands of dollars, and we had screwed up the experiment. And the only way I knew is that I looked at it, and they all looked the same. So, questions? That's our information. So double-blind is what? The people don't know what group they're in, and the researcher doesn't know what group they're in, because that's even more important, because, boy, I want my research. Claudia just did a research study for me, and it came out exactly backwards. That was a sad day for her and me, because it's her master's thesis. But it didn't turn out the way I wanted it. It was exactly backwards from the way I wanted it. But that's the way it turned out. Yeah. Yeah.
He looked at all of them together. Yeah, so the first researcher had the data for all of them, but he picked out the ones that matched his hypothesis. So the ones that showed that cholesterol led to heart disease were the ones that he chose. But when you combined them all together, it actually showed an inverse relationship.
And that's just hard, because Ansel Keys was so sure that heart disease was caused by fat in the diet that he pushed a country for 2 or 3 decades that he was around. And Ansel Keys came up with a study, and he pushed it, and pushed it, and pushed it, and was pushing the wrong direction. And finally now we know that it's not true. The stuff that he was saying, fat in the diet doesn't lead to heart disease as a total. I mean, certain kinds of fat disease, but as a total fat doesn't.
Does that answer your question?
I mean, it is. Ansel Keys just pulled 7 of them that showed you eat fat, heart disease goes up. But the second researcher looked at all 22 countries, and when you looked at the fat intake, it actually meant that heart disease went down. And so Ansel Keys just looked at the countries that proved his point and didn't look at all the countries that didn't prove his point.
So is there, can he be like half right? Like maybe in those 7 countries that happened, like those people have got a much different lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I was considering, I was very curious about the coconut study. And maybe it's not as good. Maybe coconut is system.
That's a very good point, because
You're all very, very different.
we're all very, very different. And when you have an animal study, it doesn't mean that it works in people. when you have a human study, depending on who your subjects are, you can't generalize that to everybody if it's a certain small population. So you're exactly right. That was just the first one I showed you that was funny. But we've done a lot of studies in the United States that look at coconut oil consumption and heart disease, and even in the US studies that we've done. But that's a very good point. That's how we get screwed up, is that we take... Well, you weren't around because in the 70s and in the 80s, when we had lots of coconut oil and palm oil, and we found out that saturated fat was bad, instantaneously in a 3 or 4 year period, all these palm coconut oils just disappeared off the market, and we came up with hydrogenated soybean oil. And when you hydrogenate soybean oil, you end up with trans fat. Is that good? No, that's the worst thing you can do is have trans fat. So we replaced coconut oil with trans fat, which made heart disease worse in this country. So good points, though. Any other questions? Yeah.
So if you have a person with high cholesterol and there's heart disease, what would you advise them to do?
See, what I tell people is the number one thing, the question was, what would I advise people to do that had risk for heart disease because they had high cholesterol? And there's a number of things that work, and we do have a thing on 10 foods. The number one food is soluble fiber. And so I tell people to eat soluble fiber. Number two is phytosterols. You find those, the only thing that takes cholesterol in your body and pumps it out of the body, which I don't have time to talk about, but it does. And you get phytosterols in nuts. But you don't get enough of them, so you have to get something that's really condensed. And so you can get Benecol, Take Control, Smart Balance, margarines that have an efficacious dose of phytosterol. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing is just substituting saturated fats with polyunsaturated fats. So if you like fried chicken, fine, but instead of frying it in lard or beef tallow, you fry it in something like olive oil or canola oil, and you get a good oil. You can have a great, healthy balance of fats. Those are the three most important things you can do to reduce risk. But chocolate is in there too. Chocolate reduces blood pressure like that. You eat cocoa, real cocoa powder, and within 2 hours, your blood pressure drops. Your vessels expand, and the volume is the same, makes the blood pressure drop. And so cocoa is good, tea is good, garlic is good. There's a variety of things you can eat that help reduce your risk. Other questions? Well, I'm just saying that cocoa powder, if you have Dutch processed cocoa powder, they've taken cocoa powder, and when they Dutch process it, they take out some of the bitter ingredients, and they're all the important ones. So if you look at every package of hot cocoa on the market, it says Dutch processed hot chocolate. And so you don't want Dutch processed. But if you buy Hershey's cocoa, Nestle's cocoa, any of the regular cocoa stuff in the store, it has an amazingly good effect on your body, reducing blood pressure. So, yeah. Yep. Doesn't give you diarrhea at all because the amount of bile salts in your system are very small. But cholesterol is pretty small too. And so when you eat 2 tablespoons of some kind of a soluble fiber, Oat Bran Fiber is the same thing, it binds to it, it pulls it out of the system. It actually makes your stools bulkier, you know, because you've got that fiber, but it doesn't do anything harmful at all. It's not like Olean, that new oil they put in potato chips, and on the package it says causes anal leakage. Now, does that even sound good? Anal linkage. Wow potato chips. So Wow potato chips were fried in Olestra, and so they're on the market now. They're still a low-fat oil, but it has a disclaimer. And who would want to eat something that has anal leakage? That's one thing I don't want in life, you know, if I'm hanging around. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay, kids, thanks for having us. Jim Painter and Claudia Bueno.